But no, I think it'll be a lively discussion today. And I watched both debates, did a lot of research, watched clips of various things, short clips of this and that. Found what I could, and I always try to be as knowledgeable as I can.
Well, that's good. You'll see a consistency with me that doesn't go away depending upon the audience that I have. So,
And good morning. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Today, I am joined by somebody from Kings County. He is the current district attorney, and he is running again. Would this be the third term?
this will be my third term, yes.
Okay, well, welcome, Keith Fagundes. Before we get there, I traditionally start with my opportunities to get involved. I'm going to do something different today. I'm going to just give you who my candidates are, the main ones, not every single one. And I only put down people that I'm enthusiastic about, that I've met, that I've spoken with. In some cases, I've interviewed. So I have a pretty good sense of who they are, what they stand for. Saw them on camera, off camera, because that unfortunately is not always the same. So for governor, I am enthusiastically endorsing Jenny Ray LaRue. Raised the second most money, very smart. She agrees with my values, endorsed by the CRA. Did not make it and get the California Republican Party's endorsement, but she was in the final four. I really think that's the way to go. For Secretary of State, I really am excited about Rachel Hamm. For Attorney General, there's kind of a non-Republican, no party preference person that I think is pretty fair. I really liked her. I liked her answers. I thought she was very consistent. I got to stand or sit next to her during a luncheon so I could watch all her body language. I was constantly watching for anything where she didn't believe what she was saying or she was bothered. She passed with flying colors. And she comes extremely well endorsed. For Senator, I like Cordy Williams for the full term. Good speaker, raising money, enthusiastic, conservative Christian, really like him. For the Nunes partial term, finishing it up, I really don't see a lot of choice. If you believe in freedom, you have to go with Connie Conway because Lauren Hubbard is a hardcore woke leftist. He regularly goes to the Tower Theater and protests against religious freedom, doesn't want the church to be in that building that they legally purchased. For the 21st District, that's kind of centered in Kingsburg now. I really like Michael Marr. For the 22nd District, that is down in Kings County largely. That is David Valadeo's district. I like Adam Medeiros. I've met everybody but Rudy Salas, including Valadeo, and I don't have a positive thing to say about him, so we're going to move on. As we get up towards Merced and a little bit of Fresno, I really like David Giglio. For Superintendent of Public Instruction, we're most of the way through this list. I like George Yang. First-generation American, Chinese immigrant, truly values freedom, brings a fresh perspective to education, which I think they need. You know, he hasn't bought into all of the ridiculous. There's so much. We could do a whole show on that, and we're going to let that go. But I like George Yang. Only got two more. For State Senate, locally, Amnon Shor. He is definitely my guy. He's an Israeli. He's first-generation American. He is right on issues. He is speaking before my group tonight, so I'm looking forward to that. And for the Assembly, 27th District, this is west of 99, almost as far south as Hanford, but not quite Hanford, and as far north as about Merced. I'm supporting Amanda Fleming. With that being said, any comments on any of those?
You know, most of those are out of our little district, and I can't say that I've done the full research on them. I do know that Anne Marie Schubert, the no party preference candidate for the Attorney General spot, I do know her. I've worked with her. I've seen her in action through the California District Attorneys Association, and she's a class act. She's a solid person. She understands public safety. She understands upholding the law, and that I think she's able to set aside any political issues she might have with the laws and do her function as the Attorney General and uphold those laws. So our current Attorney General seems to put his political opinion ahead of his legal obligation and function as the Attorney General, and he won't uphold the laws or defend the laws to the right extent. So
well, that's part of why COVID tyranny was ruled the day. Why King Newsom got away with a lot of what he did, because our Attorney General didn't have our backs. He didn't care about our freedom. He cared about whatever agenda there was.
Well, and I think in our case, our little county didn't have a writs and appeals division because we're so small, but we had to create one ad hoc because he wouldn't defend the laws and defend our cases anymore. So we had to start appealing our own cases and doing our own work in that regard. And it's tough work for a small county. It really is. But we get it done, and we've been very successful on many fronts for the good values that our community stands for down in Kings.
Go ahead and just a brief intro. Who are you? What's your history? Why are you running again?
Well, I am Keith Fagundes. I've been the district attorney for 7 years. I was born and raised in Kings County. I attended all local schools there. I got through high school at Hanford High, and then I attended Fresno Pacific University while attending COS and West Hills to bring all those units together. I was doing a paralegal program at COS. I was doing some general ed at West Hills, and I was attending Fresno Pacific University at the time to start obtaining my pre-law emphasis and my political science bachelor's. So I was doing that while I was working. I was running a business. I had already, by the time I hit college, had supervised a division in our local Oldsmobile Buick GMC car dealership, supervising 5 people in the service department and being a service writer and doing many other functions in the organization. So I knew leadership skills even that young. In fact, some of those folks I worked with there are now sheriff's deputies and are working other places that I still work with today. So it's kind of cool in that regard. But I attended Fresno Pacific University and then San Joaquin College of Law here in Fresno. I did that while living in Kings County, and the commute wasn't so bad. And
well, you were also young, so the energy of youth is something I miss.
Well, it is, and I developed some habits through all that work ethic. And I would get up at, starting in high school, I would get up at 3:30 in the morning, go down and wash 300 cars, go to school, be back there to do the service department, and then work till about 6:30 or 7 at night, and then go home and do homework. Gave me good skills through college, because in law school I really needed that stamina. And throughout law school, I kept a similar schedule, and sadly, I pushed it to the point that I know my body used to be able to be awake for 3 days before I needed sleep. And that's what got me through law school. And when I finished law school, I thought I was going to be a water and ag attorney, because that's where the money was. I was raised poor. We weren't a wealthy family, so I thought, I got to go where the money is, as most people think. And local attorney Bob Dowd gave me advice 23 years ago. He said, go work for a DA's office in Tulare County. You'll get trial experience. You'll be unstoppable when you come into the civil arena. So I went to Tulare County. Phil Klein was gracious enough to take a chance and give me a job as a brand new attorney. He asked me for a 3 to 5 year commitment, and I gave it to him. And at the end of that 3 to 5 years, I had developed so many skills that I didn't know that a 3-year prosecutor probably normally wouldn't be handling special circumstance gang multiple defendant murder cases, but I was. But when I transferred to Kings County, I had my first child and almost missed her birth because I was out in Porterville helping with some search warrants. And so my wife said, that being on the road 2 hours a day isn't any fun, and you're so far from home, generally speaking. So I moved to Kings County, got a job over there as a deputy, handling their gangs, their homicides, department stuff, just run-of-the-mill.
This is Deputy DA.
Deputy DA,
okay.
Correct. And after that, I was fortunate enough to be promoted to the acting chief, and then that's when things started to change. I loved the job. I had no intention of ever doing anything other than prosecution. And then Ron Calhoun, who was the DA then, lost an election. Then a new DA came in, and he pretty much came in and just abdicated all authority to anybody and everyone who would seize it. And I stayed.
This is Strickland.
Strickland, yes. Okay. And I stayed for 16 months under Strickland, hoping to give it a chance because I believe so much in prosecution. And then when the atmosphere got so poisonous and ugly there, I chose to leave. I opened my own practice. I was very successful there. And then it was during that time that law enforcement was still asking me to help them with their search warrants and help them with cases. And anyway, they encouraged me to run, and I did. We won 2 terms already, both elections, with 70% of the vote. And
well, I noticed that on your website, the first thing you really see is what happened 7 years ago with you and Strickland. It surprised me that was still first.
Well, it's still there because I'm really not a techno nerd. I really don't know how to run websites. So we have other people who are moving some things around, and those articles are just interesting articles to remind people that we are still fixing the problems from 7 years ago. We are still dealing with that, and that we don't want to go back to that, because that's what this election would be about, is going back to it. Before we get off the topic of who I am, I would be remiss if I obviously didn't mention my wife and family and all that. So I'm the youngest of 7 children, and all of my siblings work hard, and we were raised to work hard. My parents were a loving family. We weren't wealthy, but we sure had a lot of wealth when it came to love and work ethic. And so being the youngest of 7, I pretty much worked through law school with the support of family and friends, obviously. And when I was a sophomore in high school, I met my wife. She wasn't my wife then. And we dated for 9 years. We were married. We've been married for 27 years now. We have 2 beautiful children in the meantime. And they are really why I fight so hard and do the things I do in the community. Because during this time, I've donated back to the community in every charitable way we can. I'm a Rotarian. I stay involved in as many events as I can for CASA, the Court-Appointed Special Advocates, and any other organization that I can donate to and help out in that way. I'm particularly invested with Mary Immaculate Queen School and our St. Peter's Church in Lemoore. And we, 15 years ago, we got involved in the school when my children started attending there, and they had some structural financial issues and other things, and we got involved and helped turn that around. We created a scholarship fund that allows at least 20 impoverished families to attend the school with scholarships, and we've just transformed that school into something that's vibrant and successful today with a good endowment that they can rely on. And just last weekend we did a fundraiser to raise more money for that school, and so I took a hiatus from campaigning and working for that weekend to do something out for the school. So that's what I'm all about on a personal level and professionally. In the office, we took over 7 years ago. The reason 7 years ago is so important is there were 1,800 cases sitting on attorneys' desks and 2,100 cases sitting on clerical desks with nothing happening with their cases. So the computer system was in shambles, the case management system. The attorneys were carrying paper files to court. Things were a mess. We had the agencies creating digital files and then printing paper, delivering it to us in 3 copies, and then we would process it, and eventually 6-8 months, maybe a year later, get it to the court, and then the court would shred it at the end of it all. And that was just an absurdity that everybody creates paper to shred it and creates all that extra work. So we invested in a computer system, and we paid for it by leaving an attorney position open for 3 years while I and my assistant did all the work for that attorney, and use that salary savings to pay for that system. So it was virtually free to us. It was in the budget anyway, and we put that money to better use.
So now I follow, because you made some allusions to that without spelling out the details.
Right, and the details are that we invested in a system that we wanted attorneys and myself as leadership to have access to cases ongoing. When I was in the office before as the acting chief, people would ask me questions in the public, and I had no ability to find the file on the spot. Today, I can look it up on my phone and have mobile devices that can get to things. And obviously, it's all approved by the Department of Justice. And we, of course, limit access. It's double security and all those fine functions. But we do function in a largely paperless environment. When we had a backlog, the court also had a backlog. And so in about 2015, 2016, when we switched to our system, we were able to convince the court to use Dropbox as the transfer method of the files and the complaints and everything. In doing that, it relieved the burden from the agencies of bringing us paper too. It was a strictly digital chain. We both accomplished our backlogs, and by 2017, the courts nor us had a backlog. So if you think about it, it's 2,500 cases sitting at the court, 2,100 cases with our clerks, and 1,800 cases sitting with our attorneys. No longer exists. We did that by using this Dropbox. And when COVID started, we had 18 cases out of the 30-some thousand that we had submitted that went awry. And there was human error involved in that. The names were misspelled and different things. We had 18 cases that we could not agree with the court staff on who messed this thing up. But in the end, we resolved most of them, and life went on. But the court thought it was a better course of action to go back to paper in that regard. So they wanted a paper complaint, and they wanted a paper report with every case that came through. So, of course, we had to revert to our agencies and tell them, you need to bring us a paper report within 3 days of submitting your case for filing, because that's when we're usually done processing. And they have. Our RIMS agencies, Lemoore, Hanford, and Corcoran, function flawlessly. They have been on an interface with our system since we went to it in 2017. And it's been flawless. We've had maybe 1 or 2 problems, and those were national internet problems. And then, so they've been flawless. Our sheriff's office only recently came on board with an interface. There's still some bugs to work out. I'm told on both sides that it is really human practices that we just need to adjust a little bit to fix, but we alleviated so much work from the sheriff's office records keeping staff from having to create PDFs to save them somewhere and then delete them later. We take on all that burden now. And the system is what really cleared up the backlog. And we're very proud of that.
My first question isn't actually, I know a few Kings County residents, and so I was like, okay, what would you ask? And the first one is not necessarily along those lines. Whatever aspect of the office, what would you improve upon?
Oh, if I could improve anything in the office, I would give them better infrastructure. So what we have is computers that are starting to fail, and being so heavily digital, the computers are failing. I would also improve on, we are trying to build a family justice center, which will consolidate our operation. Our victim witness division is in a different building. We actually use an old courtroom for training and hiring and grand juries and many other functions. And we want that's in a different building. We have a LISA project, which is an interactive victim experience to bring awareness to victimization and child abuse in Kings County. And that's the only one of 2 in the state. Stockton has the first one, which is copyrighted, and we were able to get that copyright from them to do it. That is in a separate building as well. So I would love to consolidate our operation into one building through a family justice center model. But more importantly, I want to consolidate county resources and have satellite offices for things such as behavioral health, Kings Community Action, Champions Recovery, all of our treatment providers, Hannah's House, and all these folks that give services to victims as well as defendants' families and victims' families. Would love to have that in one big building where I can walk them next door, and our victim services can connect them personally with services. Currently, we send them across the street, point to a building, and give them a map, and people don't make it there for whatever reason. And it goes months before people get treatment and mental health services and everything else. So we really want to,
That's interesting, but is that the role of the DA?
Well, I think it is. I think if we can prevent crime, then that staves off us having to prosecute crime.
Okay, well, it's fair for me to ask that question.
No, it absolutely is. I think it's a great question because people are confused on that, and people think the DA is supposed to just take whatever the police give them and then march to court and take whatever the judges give them. Well, I'm sorry, if you have police and judges who aren't necessarily upholding our community values, you want a DA who's going to do more. And I think it's important for a DA personally and professionally to be involved to enhance the community and not just prosecute people and lock them up, because that's really the easy part of the job. The laws are now watered down out of Sacramento to where locking them up is more difficult. But at the end of the day, I don't know of any human being who doesn't have a social obligation to be involved in other aspects of your community. And that's why I stay involved in Rotary. That is why I'm happy to attend CASA functions and support CASA. I'm happy to attend the Deputy Sheriff's Association scholarship function. I'll attend the Hanford Police Officers Association scholarship functions and Brewfests and even all those things. It's important to have prevention, outreach, and prosecution that is done. And it's not easy to do it all, but we do it all well right now. But we can do it better if we advance and come together with family justice center models and different other things. And we've proven that by saying, you know, people questioned us whether it's the role of the DA to be involved in child advocacy. It absolutely is. It has an enhanced child victims experience in the system. It has made them better. People question, does a DA really need therapy dogs? Absolutely. It has shown, I've watched it with my own eyes, these MDIC multidisciplinary interviews that we do on children after they've been molested and raped. The experience for them is 10 times better than it was than them sitting in a couch talking to a cop with a gun and a badge crying over their experience. They now have a more happy, feel-good experience as much as it can be about their victimization. And it's just in a better controlled setting. So we have done a whole lot of things that other people want to criticize, call a waste of money, but it has been beneficial. When we went paperless with and I call it paperless, it's really paper on demand, but with our computer case management system, people said, "Oh, what a waste of money! You already have one." Well, we did, and it didn't work. But when this COVID hit and everybody else was shut down because they couldn't function, we were still active and alive. We never shut our doors until we had active shooter threats. Then we did close our doors, but we didn't close it because of COVID. But we still had staff showing up every day, and that's because we had that forethought to have this digital case management system and readily accessible. We also did mass victim casualty through our victim witness program, which was pretty much forced upon us by the state and some federal money. But at the end of the day, we're going to be prepared when and if that horrible thing happens that we don't want to happen. But we're going to have the resources to also do other things with it and do outreach. And, we used it for a cooling center a couple times last year when it was 113 degrees and we had 2 elderly people who needed a break and needed some cooling. We went and gave them that respite. People say that's not the job of the DA. The DA is a part of this community, and the DA should be active in helping people in all aspects of the community. Because sadly, people don't know what a district attorney does unless they're a victim or a defendant. We want to change that, and we have changed that. They now know what we do.
And again, this is a question from Kings County resident, and one that's not an active political person, just somebody that I know is a very smart guy. Do you have a good working relationship with your staff?
I believe I do. I don't have staff who's coming to me to complain about things because I fix them when they do. And over the years, I've had a few staff members who came and complained. And a couple years ago, I had one who came and said, my foot's out the door. I'm looking for a new job. I've been asked by other agencies to go to them. Okay. And you made that decision without coming to me and telling me your problems first. And when she did tell me her problems, I took action on those problems. And now I'm being retaliated against for taking action on those problems. So that's been the only complaint that I've heard in all these years from staff. And I show up every day. I make my rounds through the office. People have access to me. My door's open. They all have my cell number. They are active in wanting to fix things. I am there to fix it. When I took office, the office hadn't had an all-staff meeting since ever. And we initiated all-staff meetings quarterly. And at every all-staff meeting, I started with those whole death by PowerPoint things. But I do the PowerPoints for the staff so that I don't miss anything because I'm a busy guy. But one of those slides on that PowerPoint is to point out, hey, whole care, self-care. Make sure that you have a well-rounded and balanced home life and work life because both benefit when you're happy at both. If you have a problem here, you are equally entitled to try to fix that problem. Come in and if I haven't heard your problem from your lips to my ear, don't assume that I've been told your problem just because you've complained to somebody else. And when you bring me a complaint, let's work on finding solutions. So we've had that open door. People know that I'm approachable. My staff, by and large, when I hear complaints that, they have a morale problem. No, we have a couple employees who may not like their current situation because they don't want to do something to make it better. And
so you think your staff feels comfortable coming to you?
I believe they do. They have no reason not to. Everybody who comes to me gets help, and we handle problems and we fix problems. So when I hear about anonymous sources who are reporting morale problems, well, maybe they shouldn't be anonymous and report them to me because they're not reporting them to me. I'm not hearing complaints. Every staff member is kind and courteous to me as well as I am to them. We break bread quite often in our office whenever we can, and people are there. They seem to be happy when I walk through the office. If they're lying to themselves or lying to me about that, I can't fix that stuff.
I read it, forget whether it was Valley Voice. They said that about 70 people have left. In addition, a few more are just about to leave. What is the normal turnover for a DA's office? I don't know the answer to that.
For the size,
it seems like a big number, but I don't know the answer to that.
No, you date back to the 1980s. Every DA's term, especially when you have a new DA, you will lose 3/4 or more of that office. And under every DA's term, you see that pattern. When Strickland was in office, in 2 years, he had 18 attorneys. He replaced 16 of them. And so that's the nature of the beast. And I don't fault him for that because I know the reality of hiring attorneys from out of the area, and I know the reality of county incomes and county paychecks. I know the reality of negotiating with the county and how stingy they can be with money, and I know how those negotiations go where some folks they can't get a fair shake and bringing up their salaries.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. I want to say thank you to all the people watching on social media. We are on various platforms. If you like what we're doing, like, subscribe. I don't do this for pay. I do this because I truly believe in bringing light to issues and trying to inspire people to action. We need to be involved to preserve freedom. Please get out there. We have a great opportunity here to vote just ahead of us. Voting in California is already open. Make sure you get it done in person if possible. When we come back, we're going to talk just a little bit about what happened in the debates. So, we are ready to roll. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. I am joined by current DA for Kings County, Keith Fagundes. He is running for a third term. So, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, I watched both debates. I was there in person for the one that the Sons of 76 put on. And then the one in Avenal, I was not able to. I had a prior commitment, but did watch online. The first question, when you were kind of accused of being part of a good old boys network, your body language changed significantly, and you can watch the tape. You swayed side to side. The cadence of your speech changed. The only time I've ever seen any evidence of it changed. Why?
Well, I'll have to go back and watch it.
I watch it on my big screen too.
I'll have to go back and watch it. I can't say that I watch it because much like hearing your voice recorded, it's hard to watch yourself on TV. I don't have a conscious awareness of anything changing. I can tell you that I still have broad support from law enforcement, and I'm not. It's ironic because it does hit a nerve that I'm being accused of the good old boy network when it's the good old boy network attacking me and wanting somebody who will act like a good old boy. And that's one thing that's hard to convey to folks, is that when you stand independently from the good old boy network and you are willing to investigate corruption with the powers that be, and you are willing to say no to the powers that be, they don't like that. And so as I watched things unfold in the last year with some of our county administrators, I stood up to them. I said no. COVID mandates, things of that nature. I said no. We're not going to prosecute people for those things. Don't put me on the spot by telling people they will be prosecuted, because I won't do it. And I demonstrated that I'm going to stand up on behalf of the people, more so than I'm going to stand up on behalf of the good old boy network. And so they knew I wasn't a team player in that regard, that I'm not going to pull a fraud upon the public. And that is why, frankly, I'd rather have support from boots on the ground like Hanford Police Officers Association, the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. The prosecutors on their own came out to support me. We also had the Kings County Professional Firefighters Association come out and support. And this is all after interviewing both candidates, getting involved, being involved, and interviewing both candidates, hearing what we had to say and what we stood for. We also both presented to the Kings County Republican Party as well as the Kings County Latino Roundtable. Both of those groups, who are typically on opposite spectrums when politically, are both supporting me in this regard, because I'm not part of the good old boy network. These are boots on the ground type of people doing the work, seeing it firsthand, and a broad spectrum of them. Not a few elites who get the top salaries, who want to still have control of things. So maybe it hit a nerve. I'll have to go watch it. I'll take your word for it.
I was just like, what's up with that?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing that now, but
yeah, and I'm going to have to go watch it because I wasn't conscious of it.
I watched it twice. Once on my phone, and then I went, no, I need to watch this on my big screen.
Yeah, well, I'll have to go watch it because I haven't really paid attention to that before. Nobody's asked me that question nor pointed that out yet.
I always see body language.
Yeah, well, I'll have to go look at that. I appreciate that. And any other insight you might have, because I'm always willing to listen and grow.
There was also something that was clearly you were a little upset with the sheriff and mentioned him several times and poked him a little bit. Now, whether that's justified, I don't even need to get into any of the specifics. But the question I was left with was, well, you're going to have to work with the sheriff if you're reelected. Absolutely. I mean, there's no maybe on that, right?
Correct.
So I was just surprised at the way you chose to kind of jab the sheriff rather than just kind of ignore it. Well, are you going to have a good working relationship with the sheriff going forward if you're reelected?
Oh, I'm sure we will when I'm reelected. I'm sure we will, because right now this is just political gamesmanship. The fact that the sheriff waited until a deadline on his race to come out means something, because he and I had a meeting the week before where nothing was mentioned. He has never come to me to complain about things and say, hey, this is a problem. much like you just commented on something you witnessed, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go watch. I'm going to go see that too, because I always want to better myself. And there's never been a time that we've turned anybody away when they show up and say, hey, I have a problem with something you did. And we either explain what we've done and either learn from the advice they have, or we explain to them what was done and they learn from the advice we have. But the sheriff's not done that. And once he came out, it was a shock, as a surprise to me as it was to many people. And that's what the problem is. Our leaders shouldn't be using their positions in order to sway their own egos and their own issues. So when I have 3 agencies who flawlessly interface with our system, but his agency waits 7 years to even attempt an interface, that shows something's wrong over there. But we did the extra work to make sure that we alleviated work for them. And the gratitude or the acknowledgement was, oh, I'm going to secretly support somebody else behind the scenes. And, I'm sure that I was aware by that night that things had been in motion for months, but yet all of our interaction for months had been normal. And it made me question his integrity as far as all the other work we've done. And so maybe my body language changed as you spotted it, and I'll have to go analyze that and see what that's all about. But at the end of the day, this race is between me and a candidate who main claim to fame is to have the sitting sheriff come out and surprisingly endorse her and do it in a political way so as that his seat could be protected. Because, again, I've been told by people afterwards, if I'd have known he was going to do something like that, I'd have run against him. Which means, yeah, he's savvy politically. He's a good politician in that regard. And I'm always willing to work. He and I have stood up together during this whole time and done joint things when it came to our military ballistics presentation to the board and, other things. We'll still stand side by side and do what we have to do. I was at the Peace Officers Memorial ceremony, and he had staff there, and I have no problem working with people as I've done for 23 years.
I thought that was a fair question.
Oh, it absolutely is. People have asked that as how does that go back? Is he willing to show up and come to our public safety meetings? And is he going to come back and work with us when we get reelected? Because we have an outstanding staff. And to hear outlandish things from these debates that are just fabricated and false with no real substance, and, they take one word and say that it means something else is really frustrating to me, given all the good work our staff has done.
When child porn came up, you said, and this is not the full quote, this is a partial quote, interpret the law according to our community values. And you've brought that up in both debates, interpret the law according to community values. I get that there's a little bit of leeway in interpreting the law and what you choose to prosecute, but why, any DA that's honest, why would those be different values in your community than other communities?
Well, I think if you look at San Francisco, they made it years ago. They would never prosecute a drug crime. They don't prosecute any type of misdemeanors.
Well, I did say fair. Obviously, they're nuts up there.
Well,
just like
correct, and that's what I'm saying is we're having policies. Prop 47 was San Francisco policies forced upon us. We worked within the parameters to meld that with our community values, to follow the law and give people the due process they deserve, while all the while knowing that our community wants people to be held accountable and wants people to take responsibility. So we balance those community values. And I'm mindful that we have almost an even split of Democrat and Republican, conservative and liberal, no party preference, politically agnostic people and the whole bit. I have to balance all of those values. And that's why I say our community values and not conservative, Republican or liberal values. Those have to all be balanced. And as a nonpartisan DA, I have to be accessible to all groups. I have to be willing to go to all groups, whether they're kind or not to me. I have to be willing to confront the issues they have, because I just might learn something from even the most hostile person. So yeah, the community values are important, and having your community values in mind means you have to be involved in the community to understand them. But so I'll stand firm on that. Community values is how we interpret the law and apply the law.
Let's see, that gives clarity on that. Instead, it was a soundbite. Now we have more clarity.
Correct, because I have now the platform and the opportunity to give clarity, and I really appreciate you having me on the show for that purpose.
A couple points you said you were a victim. Now that surprises me that you would use that word to describe yourself during the debate. And you said accusations with no facts. Now, accusations with no facts doesn't surprise me, but the fact that you chose to label yourself as a victim in your own words really surprised me. Why? Just describe that.
Well, think what I was saying is that I was feeling like a victim, because obviously I do. It seems that no matter what I say or do, it is twisted and turned into something different that it was never intended for, and it really wasn't. So, for example, when I hear broad statements that in one respect, I think at the last debate, I think my opponent claims that in one regard, I won't prosecute. She's not part of the good old boy, but yet I'm going after the good old boy network. And it is that process of calling people on the carpet for their local public corruption that then put the sights on me. And, the playbook was presented to me. They wanted me to participate with them to go after a sitting board member. And I investigated it fairly. And when I investigated it, I didn't personally. I had an investigator to look into it objectively and clearly bring the facts to us. We found a whole different picture that was the truth. And the truth was they were targeting this person because they didn't like his political position, and he wouldn't back down from them. When I told them, we're not doing that, then, of course, that same playbook was used on me, and I saw it because they told me what the playbook was, and that was unfair, and it just seemed that there was a whole lot of internal corruption going on, and when you look at it, the guilty people flee, and innocent people stay and fight for their rights. So I certainly feel like a victim in that nothing I say or do is ever interpreted with the full truth and the full discussion with any open mind. For example, when our campaign started, one of my opponent's signs had mud or something put on it. They automatically blamed me for it and said it must be that. And, as we all know in politics, there are people who run around and do crazy things with things. I had nothing to do with any type of vandalism, and yet their little echo chamber made it sound that way. And the list goes on with the crazy things that they have done, and they just do this mudslinging and this hatred. And that's really not the atmosphere you want in the DA's office. Do you really think this person can be open-minded? So standing on that stage, listening and being frustrated with not only the poor performance that was coming from the other side of the stage, but the false information and this belief somehow that I'm the bully, yet I'm not calling people names from the podium with no substance to back it up. And it's a bunch of anonymous sources and people who, stand behind, oh, we're fearful. Fearful of what? I have a whole lot of people who have come to me or my supporters who are fearful of retaliation at their work, sheriff's office and other places, if they continue to support me. And so, I'm not advertising that and beating the drum on that and blaming my opponent for it. There's other people involved in doing that. So, yeah, it does feel like I'm largely a victim in that my voice doesn't seem to be heard. And when I, read the Valley Voice that encapsulates things that just aren't true, but yet they publish them as though they are, that was offensive to me. So I wanted to make sure that we call and say, hey, that's not true. And we can go down the list of all the accusations, and they're just that. They're just
I have to go through all of them, but I wanted to very briefly touch on Mr. Waggle. Mm-hmm. He was a key person in your office, correct?
He was.
Okay. And this is being adjudicated, so I'm only going to say a couple things. The thing that shocked me was, how in the world did you find time, if 5,000 is the right number, to send 5,000 email or text messages to anybody? I don't know that I come up with 5,000 in a year.
Well, it tells you how busy we are, because when somebody lives in your home and you're that involved with their family and you share families with people, you have lots of text messages. I think there's more like 15,000 text messages between us. And this misnomer that there are 5,000 inappropriate text messages is just completely false. That is a lawyer's version of something they want to be so they can get a settlement out of the county. And as we all know, the county has insurance and they settle things because it's cheaper to settle than it is to litigate. And that's a good business practice. So I don't fault them for that. But it becomes unfair when people mischaracterize things and say something else. Right now I hear criticisms about our computer system being poorly implemented. Well, Mr. Waggle was the one who was the project manager to implement that. But yet he's the one complaining it was poorly done. And I have a litany of things. I can't get into his work.
Right, and I'm not trying to get into, I just was like, I read that and I went, how in the world do you have time to do that?
Well,
because I don't.
Well, and when you again, if there was any smoking gun with those text messages, this evil group who are hateful and mean in their political mudslinging would have already released them. But the fact of the matter is...
So you consider Mr. Waggle to be part of that group?
Oh, he absolutely is. I have no doubt. In fact, there's...
So former friend and no longer friend.
We were friends for more than 15 years. I mean, he lived in my home. That's how close we were. When he lost his home in his divorce, he needed a place. He asked for a place, and I had mutually offered, because we're not going to let my chief be homeless, and I also didn't want my chief, when he called and said, "Hey, my wife had the police at my house tonight." I'm like, "Okay, leave there. Come and stay down here. Don't be there." I can't have my chief being arrested. He's a friend. He was a confidant. And it wasn't until years later that others started bringing more information to me of some of his things that he was or was not doing, and I won't comment in detail, that I had to take action as his boss, and that he didn't like that. And so it will bear out. And, it's interesting. My opponent uses this term justice for all, but apparently it's justice for all but Keith, because justice can't be ruled out on that case yet. And I'm not being sued in there. All of that gratuitous, false information and salacious details that they want to create and make it read like a Harlequin novel is really just for public consumption for this election. And people should
notice I didn't
that.
try to get into the salacious. I just was like, wow, how'd you have time to do that?
Well, we work a lot. I mean,
notice I was like, well, okay. I wanted to at least establish this was somebody that was important in your office and is no longer part of your office.
Correct. And he chose to leave. We did not. I mean, we spent many, many hours and time with me and the assistant chief and the assistant DA trying to encourage him to engage in his job again and be involved with the group. And he chose not to. And I'm sorry, but he wanted a job that would require him not to come to work and not to be accountable to anyone. And that would be a gift of public funds. And I can't do that. It's just wrong. So, yeah, that's a sad situation because, Mr. Waggle was full support in 2018. And Mr. Waggle knows the good work we did. And because he's now disgruntled and didn't like the outcome of his poor performance, this is the retaliation that he's taken. Again, a feeling more like I'm the victim as I tried to do as much as I could to do good things for somebody. And, when you give them a home for 3 years and you share your family with them, you would expect a little bit different response from someone.
Well, we're going to go ahead and take our last break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. When we come back, I just want to go over a little bit of the case which has made the news, made both debates, and kind of what happened with the stillborn deaths. So we're going to go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Today I am joined by Kings County DA, the current DA, and he is running for that position again. He has an opponent, Sarah Hacker. And this is the third time you're running.
That's correct.
Welcome, Keith.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There's a big case that came before you and came up in both debates that has to do with drug addict women that took too many drugs and their babies were sadly, tragically, aborted. Well, aborted isn't the right word.
They were not seeking an abortion. No,
I'm completely wrong on that. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of the phrase that you're trying
miscarried.
to look for. Miscarried, yes.
So you brought a lawsuit.
We filed a criminal complaint.
Okay, what is the difference between filing a lawsuit and a criminal complaint?
Most people would think that a lawsuit is something for civil damages, and lawsuits go in civil damages. I guess in the broader sense, filing a criminal complaint, it's a criminal action. We don't usually call that a lawsuit.
Okay.
But at least that's my terminology. So
well, I'm not a lawyer, so
I am, but
I just wanted clarity on that.
Yeah, I would assume that most lawyers would think a lawsuit is in the civil arena and a criminal complaint is in the criminal side.
Okay, that's fine. So you took action with that.
Well, we did, and let's back up a little bit. So we had 2 cases that came to us. One of them, a mother had given birth to 4 or 5 children before, all high on drugs, and the treatment providers took those children away. It was the last child who died very close to full term, ready to give birth. And the mother used enormous amounts of drugs that it wasn't us, not my staff, it wasn't me standing at the gates of the hospital. It was the doctors who were treating these people. It was the social workers involved. It was the nurses who reported this to the police. It was the police department who investigated further, who brought the child to an autopsy. It was the coroner and the sheriff who were who were required by law to do an autopsy and find a cause of death, where there was a pathologist involved who decided that in both of these cases it was the methamphetamine which caused the asphyxiation of these children and these fetuses. And since the murder statute says the word fetus is there, and Roe v. Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood all protect a fetus at this stage of life, when it's submitted to us, we vetted it, and the staff, one of my staff members who is now a judge, processed the case and came to me and said, this is offensive because one of them had 4 or 5 children and taken away, all born high on drugs. Another lady had 9 other children, all born on drugs, all taken away, all being raised by different families now. That's tragic for them. But the last one, whom she named Hades, was stillbirth days within its birth. And again, when the blood work comes back and it is 5 times the legal limit of or the lethal limit to kill an adult male, something has to be done. A message has to be sent to this person. I'm not looking to send any message, nor with any case, to the public at large. This person violated the law as we read it. And these cases made their way through the appellate courts. We had judges who heard prelims on them and confirmed there's probable cause. We had judges who heard motions to dismiss for demurs, which is they can't prosecute her for this. They denied those motions. We had the 5th District Court of Appeals who heard it and said, nope, this can happen. One of the cases made it all the way to the Supreme Court of California, who could have taken that case and said, Mr. DA, you're wrong on reading this law, because we are, again, the courts interpret the laws. They would have sent that message back, but they did not. And so the next course of action was for, other groups to get involved politically and ask the Attorney General to give an opinion. Well, the Attorney General's opinion is just that. It is not law. It never has been by our Constitution or by any form of law in this United States. His job is to uphold the law as written and not to necessarily interpret it for his own political views, but for the values of the community, which is why there's this difference here. And that's why the courts get involved to make those rules. So the court was involved and said, let the prosecution go. So the case came back for prosecution. It so happens that there were other reasons, because the legislature has now become activist in trying to do AB 2223 and put open season on fetuses in the 3rd trimester and at viable stages. And, when they change that law, I will follow that law, obviously. But until then, the current law allows for the murder of a fetus to be handled appropriately and someone to take responsibility.
Are those cases still active? Because
no, they are not. So
why?
One of the cases came back, and the same judge who ruled on the Adora Perez case that there is no fundamental problem with prosecuting these types of cases, and who also sentenced Adora Perez to prison and took a plea on Adora Perez, he heard what's called a 995, which is a motion to dismiss for lack of probable cause. And the judge who heard the probable cause hearing made a clear factual finding that he's finding that this person, Ms. Becker, was told and had knowledge of the harmful effects to the fetus by the statement of that this could cause brain damage to your child. And he found that that was sufficient for a Watson advisement, which is knowledge sufficient for implied malice, gets to second-degree murder. He made that factual finding. On the 995, the judge sits with a little different hat, and the second judge believed that despite that factual finding, despite the fact that many judges had found many and signed many probable causes based upon that same fact in that same case for other search warrants, he decided, he's going to read a narrower version of the Watson rule, which is, how did she know? And he took it from she probably knew to I don't think she knew. And so he changed the burden of proof slightly, which might be his prerogative to do. And he said he didn't think that telling her that brain damage could be caused to her fetus was sufficient. She had to be told, you will kill this fetus, in order for him to find probable cause, which really, that probable cause burden is a low burden, and I still take issue with it. But he put it more towards a beyond a reasonable doubt standard, which is what the trial standard to a jury is. And so we take issue with his ruling, but he dismissed the case on the 995. And at that time, we had already heard rumblings of the legislature trying to change the law now. So what we saw was the judge had released her before that ruling to a residential treatment program. She had had her longest period of sobriety by staying in our jail for nearly 3.5 years. She entered this program, was doing well in this program, had entered college by this time. And so we used our discretion and figured we could refile this case and do another prelim and show the evidence to the court. But we have proven our point. We have forced her into sobriety. It was her lockup in Kings County Jail that did it. She was better off at that moment than she had been in her entire adult life. So I don't need a statistic. I don't need to file these cases for any particular reason other than to get people to stop their negative behavior. And she did. So we gave her that credibility. We gave her that momentum. And now she's in college, going to law school. I hope she's successful. I hope she never, ever harms another child during her pregnancy. Adora Perez, we had a similar path to where the case came back on a habeas review, and the sitting judge, who heard that matter, ruled that yes, the prosecution can go on. I only want to hear about one issue. She's abruptly retired. We got a new judge who changed the whole consideration. Never really ruled on the veracity of the prosecution, but ruled on shouldn't have taken the plea to manslaughter. And so, all in all, we stand firm on what we did in those cases. We didn't use political reasons, but those women are better off today than they were before we took action. And so, we're watching the law, and we're going to see what happens. But I hope that there's sobriety for both of them. So
we're down to about 1:20. Final thoughts.
Well, my final thoughts are: I've had the endorsements and the sound endorsements of the police officer, of Hanford police officers, correctional peace officers, the prosecutors, the firefighters, the Latino Roundtable, business owners, ranchers, farmers, educators. The list goes on and on. Chief Reuben Shortnessy has always been an ardent supporter. His agency has always been excellent and cooperative in how we do business. Chief Charlie Flores. I have nearly all of our former district attorneys in the county supporting me, with the exception of Mr. Strickland, obviously. We have all of the Lemoore City Council. We have mayors from Corcoran and as well as Avenel. And we just have scores of deputy sheriffs and police officers and people who know what public safety is about standing behind me. We have hundreds of these people, and not to mention all the business owners and all the good citizens of Kings County who are behind this, because they know that my opponent's tactics, my opponent's antics are false. They're misleading. They're without foundation. And we should really cringe when we think that that type of behavior could ever enter the DA's office and be the benchmark of what the DA's office is. Because if she'll do it to me in a campaign, she'll do it to anyone else that the sheriff wants to be crossed with or that she wants to be crossed with. So I would caution people in that regard. We stand firm on our record, and I ask for everybody's vote because we're doing great things in Kings County.
That is basically a wrap. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXCX, the best talk in town. Keith, I thank you for your time.
I thank you for the time on your radio show.
You're welcome.
I really do appreciate it.